Well, a little bit of the history I think would be good.
Perfect.
So, archery. So I started shooting archery when I was, I guess, 14, and my family had some history in archery, but it wasn't something I really engaged in. My grandfather shot, competed on like a state level or something like that a long time ago. Archery kind of had this like heyday time period of sorts where they were almost trying to make it like bowling, and that there would be like archery alleys like there are bowling alleys. Yeah, I never actually watched him shoot, and I just kind of had that like familial history. When you're trying to do more startup-y stuff, and the main message I want to share with you guys is when I'm trying to prototype something, I try and figure out how to make the numbers work to sell one. And that's where I start. So, you're gonna have some materials, maybe some labor. You could have, these are gonna be some of your two main ones, right? So let's say you would have like $10 in materials and $5 in labor, right? That would put your first cost of goods, right, at 15. Okay, and so for instance, I'm just trying to organize my thoughts here. Things that wouldn't go into cost of goods would be like payment processor fees. Right, that might be $1, right? Then you might have shipping. Right, that might be $5, right? These are expenses. You don't want to upcharge your customer for them because it makes your prices higher, okay? So, yeah, I'm going to separate the materials a little bit. So let's say that we have so let's look at my shot trainer products. I have sleeves, straps. When I'm having conversations with a new vendor, I want to know several things. One is, what's the minimum order quantity? And what's the lead time? So, the sleeves, for instance, like again, we're just making up hypotheticals, right? The minimum order quantity might be 100, right? Like that, the manufacturer might literally not do business with you until you order 100 of something, okay? Now the reason why this matters is because like this gets into the forecasting. If you know that you can't order less than 100, then figuring out what your sell-through rate is of that 100 basically becomes your main forecasting engine. And then you tie that together with lead time, right? Like as you start to look at your main cost of goods, it's not enough to just know what the unit cost is. Also understanding your minimum order quantity and your lead time is going to dramatically affect how you can forecast like when you need to buy new inventory, and because you have to buy 100 at a time. So that becomes then your business decision. Or like what I would really be trying to do is, if this truly is 100, I'm gonna go try, like, let's say the first vendor I talk to and they say, oh, well, your minimum order quantity is 100, then I'm gonna go talk to another vendor and say, can I buy 50? Can I buy 25? Right? I'm trying to basically get this minimum order quantity to all be one. Right? Now, the reason to do that, especially when you have a new product, is because it's going to create the highest cost of goods that that you're going to see, okay? And so if you then create your highest cost of goods, depending upon if you, now these two, for instance, another reason to separate out, you're going to have different components of your cost of goods buildup, and some are going to affect what your markup is, and some are not. Okay, so for instance, we see total cost of goods here is 20 with $6 in non-markup cost of goods. So total is 26, right? But say that I'm doing an e-commerce sale of which there's no intermediary, then, okay, and let's say I want a 50% margin, then, so how would I, can you start to see how I'm trying to get at, how I would get to 50% margin? So if I double this and I say, okay, well it's $40, and then I add 6 to it, then I have my 50% margin, right? So, but if I would double 26, that would be 52, right? Which is not 46, which would give me a higher than 50% margin, right? Do you see how that's adding up?
Yeah.
Now the reason why that's important is because it affects what channels you're selling through, and it affects how you name your price, okay? So, if you want to do both e-commerce and a distribution model, that means you need to leave room in your margin for both, right? Well, if you know what your unit costs are at a minimum order quantity of basically 1, then this is going to be the highest cost of goods. And now you essentially want to, you know, you can, some really rough numbers would be, if it's just e-com and you're never going to do distribution, you can multiply it by 2. If you're going to do distribution as well, right, by 4. Because they are going to want close to the same margins that you want. And I think, you know, 50% is at least a good starting point, depending upon what market you're in, or, you know, but again, just purely for the sake of let's make the numbers easier, let's try and, if you just have a completely brand new business idea, it's pretty safe to start with these kinds of metrics. Depends a little bit around how you want to set your final price, but that's why you separate out some things, but not others, okay? And then the final margin that your company makes is going to be some blend of whatever, maybe you do 10% of your sales here and 90% of your sales here, right? And then that's going to be the eventual final contribution margin that your business gets. But if you don't make your pricing to allow for this, right? Like if you're selling them on your store, on your e-commerce store for 46, your distribution partners they can't make money. So it starts with your unit costs. You gotta figure out what your unit costs are, just simply to make one. That's gonna tell you what your cost of goods are. If you're gonna go an e-commerce route only, well then maybe you can get away with really low margins. And, but I've had a lot of success doing this. So even though, and so basically on my e-commerce site, I set my prices at this one, right? Which gives me a fat margin, because this is what my cost of goods are when I'm still selling on e-commerce, of which if I was doing only e-commerce, maybe I'd be happy to run that business. But because I am able to do a lot of business with distributors and it's good for me to do that, then this is the actual price that I need. But this, you can see how where this does come back to what this minimum order quantity is. Because if this is 100, right, that's really dictating how many I need to sell, and this lead time is telling me how long it's gonna take before I can order more. Now, of course, you could have like multiple orders going at the same time or something like that, but I think if you have multiple orders going at the same time, that means order more, right? So that way you don't sell through it so fast or something. But hopefully you can see that like where the prices come from directly comes from the unit costs that come from the relationships that you're building with each of these vendors that's supplying the minimum order quantity and the lead times that you're signing up for. And so I think a lot about minimum order quantity and lead time, almost more than the prices. Because the prices are kind of like, they are what they are, right? And if you're not happy with what the price is, it means go find new vendors. If you're not happy with the minimum order quantity, go find new vendors and say, well, I'm currently doing this. Would you do it for less, or would you do it for a shorter amount of time? Or could I buy more frequently, but just, and then that kind of becomes, how do you want to run your business, right? Like if you only you could run your business to where you'd place one purchase order a year, right? But then that might mean you're sitting on inventory for weeks and months at a time, and okay, if that's how you want to run your business, that's okay. But you have to have big margins to maybe do that, because it's not free to keep your warehouse open or something like that. I don't know, have you guys seen anything like this?
Yes,
Yeah.
from last term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is kind of the basics of how I start to look at unit costs. How does that affect my cost of goods? Whether or not, depending upon my sales channels, that's going to affect what margins that I want. And you need to plan for your most expensive sale channel to set your price. So if you're going to use distribution, for instance, again, just trying to drive home the same points, that means multiplying your cost of goods by 4 rather than just by 2. And it starts to get you in the ballpark of, well, here's what this product would actually cost at market. And if you look at this same process in the same way that, like, I look at this as itself a product almost, and it's going to go through evolutions. So, like, again, if I'm trying to prototype a product, I at least need to get all the parts in it that need to go into the product. And to some extent, I don't care what they cost or how long it's going to take, or can I just get them in the first place to make the thing, right? That's version 1. Version 2 is then, okay, well, now that I have that cost whatever amount of money, it took however amount of time, you start to like, okay, these are all data points. And then it's like, okay, well, what is my minimum order quantities for each of those? Or you start to get into that part of the relationship. But that stuff all takes multiple conversations. You can't solve that first problem with one conversation. It's just, most of the time it's just not possible. Or the only way that you could is if you've already worked with this company before doing a different product, but it's kind of similar, or you already have a relationship in place that would.
Do you look at potential in year-to-year growth?
I mean, year to year, no. Month to month, yes. Year to year has always been so dramatically long term, right? Like, yeah, no.
Sure.
Seasonality, yes.
Is it seasonal? Is archery seasonal?
Yeah. Humans are seasonal creatures. So because I'm selling a consumer good, I think it follows some seasonality like that. I want to at least split it up into two main categories. One would be you can make decisions that make the most amount of money for your business. You also can make decisions that maybe require the least amount of effort. And that depends upon how much work you want to do in the business. I think a healthy way to look at businesses is, well, how stressful is it to do that? How much time does it take? Do I like my partners? Not all businesses have to be in this high growth mode all the time. It might not ever be huge, but you have a good relationship with a couple key vendors who help you do your thing, and maybe that's your business. Not all businesses have to be huge, and you can learn a lot from smaller businesses, or have some relationships where other people are doing some of the work, or like it's good to have partners who are vested financially to keep the thing going. The way that I build the unit costs and then how I incorporate minimum order quantity and the lead time, like it really does affect, those are my main data points, right, that I then use through the process of doing sales over several months. And I see, well, how long did it take to sell through the 100? Like I couldn't order any fewer than 100, right? So if I can't order any fewer than this, then how long does it take me to sell that minimum number?
That 100 becomes your one.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. And then that almost becomes the whole engine. And then that tells you each time that you make a new order for 100, that becomes basically your risk. So say that the minimum order quantity is 100,
mm-hmm.
but you're selling through that still really fast.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Well then, I think that that's where lead time starts to come into play a little bit more. If you know that it's going to take 6 weeks to order more, then that means to some extent, like, you want enough. You don't want to run out. Running out would be bad. And trying to cut everything down to zero margin is too challenging of a business to run, right? So if it takes 6 weeks is the longest, then maybe you want things to be ordered every 8 weeks, for instance. So that way they get into the warehouse and it takes 2 weeks to count and make sure everything's correct. And that way you never really run out. Your inventory level, then you start to look at, what's the time period, right? How long is this? How does this fit into here? And, it basically just means how many did you sell during this time period?
Mm-hmm.
And you basically want to be lining up the lead time with your sell-through rate.
Right.
Right. And so you're basically like trying to somehow align minimum order quantity, lead time, and sell-through. Or it's like, instead of minimum order quantity is one way to describe it, it could instead be kind of like optimized order quantity for the lead time. Whereas the minimum, the reason I like to start with minimum is because that helps me get to the maximum unit cost. That helps me figure out my pricing.